On the afternoon of July 14, 1941, a massive crowd of over 30,000 people flooded onto the streets of Endicott, New York. They had come out to celebrate the opening of the village's newest factory, one that didn't make shoes or tan leather. Spanning an entire block, the four-story behemoth was the latest addition to the IBM Corporation's growing industrial empire in the Southern Tier, an empire that would continue to expand over the next 40 years, stretching to almost every corner of the region, employing over 16,000 people at its peak, and dominating the region's industrial landscape in the latter half of the 20th century. Few in the crowd on that hot summer afternoon could have possibly imagined the incredible heights that IBM would reach in the region and beyond. Few, perhaps, but the man at the center of the celebration, the man who had built the empire and would rule over it for more than 40 years. Thomas J. Watson Sr. wasn't a gifted inventor or a brilliant scientist. He never built a single thing with his own hands. But he would construct a company that in his time would out-invent, out-research, and out-build all their competitors, becoming one of history's most influential and enduring organizations, pushing the world of information processing into the mainstream and setting the stage for the digital revolution that would transform the planet.
Thomas Watson Sr. is considered by historians and business executives as probably one of the 10 or 15 top executives of the 20th century in business in the United States, and really created a company that was a model for many others to emulate.
More than any other business leader of the 20th century, Watson would create and exploit a powerful corporate culture, creating a driven workforce so loyal to Watson and IBM that the culture itself would become the most powerful engine driving IBM's phenomenal success.
Thomas Watson was really one of the great American company builders. He took this company that was nothing really when he joined it, and infused it with a sense of its own greatness, its own destiny, of being able to be this institution that would last forever. Which, when he arrived in Endicott in 1914, people thought he was nuts for saying something like that.
Nowhere within Watson's growing empire was he more at home and more admired than at IBM Plant Number 1 in Endicott, New York. There, he would locate the company's most important research and educational operations along the village's main thoroughfare on North Street, showering his workers and their families with pay and benefits beyond that of any other corporation in America at the time, helping fulfill the dreams of the children of immigrants who had come to the valley a generation earlier.
As it grew, people who had joined the company off the farms, out of cities, worked their way up into the middle class, compliments of IBM and their own personal work and contributions to the company. And so they benefited and moved into the middle class, and they in turn insisted that their children be educated and aspire to other jobs that were the middle class or upper middle class. It was the American dream, classic American dream, played out in hundreds of communities that had IBMers all over the United States.
Even today, over half a century after his death, and with the empire he built in Endicott a fraction of its former size, lingering evidence remains of Watson's lasting legacy and influence throughout the Southern Tier, offering clues and opportunity to a disillusioned community struggling to write its next chapter.
Companies have such a profound influence on the culture of a community that even long after they're gone, the communities maintain this culture. And so wherever there are IBMers, it's been my observation that wherever we've had IBMers in large quantities, that ethic of work and honesty and innovation spills out into the communities that they live in. And that all derives really from Watson Sr.
Production sponsorship for Watson, provided by Visions Federal Credit Union. Additional support provided by Coughlin and Gerhardt, LLP. Hinman, Howard and Cattell, LLP. Marilyn Gaddis Rose. Patricia J. Foreman. Robert F. Lush. And by contributions to WSKG from viewers like you. Thank you. Special thanks to IBM Endicott for use of archival footage and photographs.
Now, Miss Judith Johnson, daughter of Frank Johnson and great-granddaughter of Mr. George F. Johnson, will unveil the memorial. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me much pleasure to present Mr. Thomas J. Watson.
It is fitting that on this 94th anniversary of his birth, we meet to pay homage to the man.
On the day the Triple Cities paid tribute to an icon, they called on another. But for Thomas Watson, Johnson was so much more.
While I am in the position this afternoon of representing all the people in the community, I desire to pay my personal tribute to the man whose friendship and encouragement meant so much to me when I started to develop an industry in Endicott.
In the fall of 1914, Thomas Watson was 40 years old and in search of redemption. Over the last 17 years of his life, he had risen from absolute poverty to a level of wealth and success beyond his dreams, before watching it all slip away in an instant. When I arrived in Endicott for the first time, he later told Johnson, it felt like I had come home. Thomas John Watson was born in the winter of 1874 in East Campbell, New York. His father, also Thomas, was a struggling farmer who also operated a small saw and lumber mill nearby in Painted Post. The Watsons were poor. Tom's mother, Jane, did everything she could to give him and his 4 older sisters a happy home during their cold and hungry winters. Tom's parents were devout Christians who taught their children the value of persistence and optimism, tirelessly preaching for them to hold tight to the belief that better times were just around the corner.
Those values were the only ones he knew. He had not lived in Europe or Latin America or traveled in Asia or any of that. All he knew were the values that he had acquired here in central New York. And those played out very effectively.
After finishing school at age 17 and anxious to make his own money, Watson took a job selling pianos and organs for a local hardware store. The job gave him a sense of importance and purpose. But when he discovered his boss was cheating him out of pay, he quit, moved to Buffalo, and started selling sewing machines for the Wheeler and Wilcox Company. The new job worked out well, at first, until the day he chose to congratulate his own success.
He had a very fine sale, and he went into a local saloon, as many of his compatriots did at that time, and celebrated this sale. And he stayed a bit long and drank a bit too much, and when he went out of the saloon, he found that his horse and his buggy and his equipment had been stolen.
Having realized that he had made an error, because guess who would have to pay for that merchandise? It would come out of his pocket. He decided that drinking was not a good thing to do while you were working. So it became part of his process of professionalization as he became a more professional salesman, that, among other things, there had to be discipline in one's own personal life. So it went far beyond having a few beers in a bar. It was all about being professional and, if you will, on duty all the time.
Watson was fired for the loss of his rig. Beaten but unbroken, he moved on and began selling stock shares for the Buffalo Savings and Loan. At night, he lived in the back of a local drugstore, eating handouts and sleeping on piles of rags and boxes. When he had earned enough money, he decided to open a small butcher shop with plans to create a chain of shops across the state. Within a year, the shop failed. He was now 22 years old, out of work, out of money, and seemingly out of options. A return to the family farm was all his future seemed to present. In November of 1896, Watson began to box up and sell off the contents of his bankrupt butcher shop when he came across the store's cash register.
When the time came to send back that machine, which was a rental, he returned the machine, and in the process met folks at NCR. And to make a long story short, he was offered a job as a salesman, which he took.
It was the break that would transform Watson's life. By the late 19th century, National Cash Register, NCR, had become one of America's fastest-growing companies, led by one of the most dynamic CEOs of the day, John H. Patterson. John Patterson didn't invent the cash register. He stumbled upon it in 1881. As manager of a family store, Patterson had purchased one of Ritty's incorruptible cashier machines and quickly recognized its incredible value to other shop owners looking to deter sticky-fingered clerks. He and his brother bought the patents and created NCR. By 1895, NCR was the dominant player in the world of cash registers. Patterson was one of the most charismatic and innovative leaders in American history. He was the first to build a national sales team, creating what he named his American Selling Force. He inspired them with revival-style meetings and enticed them in with big pay, big bonuses, and benefits. Patterson was also a tyrant who ruled with absolute power. He insisted his men follow a strict sales primer that told them what to say and when to say it. He was a health and diet fanatic who required all workers to submit to annual height and weight checks. He also manipulated and toyed with his workers at will, praising and promoting at one turn, then denouncing and demoting at the next. He once notified a manager that his services were no longer needed by burning the man's desk on the company's front lawn. Watson saw little of this his first 6 years with NCR, working primarily at the company's sales offices in Buffalo and Rochester. But Watson's boyish charm and small-town manners played well with the shop owners he visited. By 1902, he was running NCR's Rochester office and quickly began to enter Patterson's radar.
Watson was given opportunities to make sales, to manage operations, and everything he touched worked well, turned to gold, which simply encouraged Patterson to see him as his fair-haired boy.
Early in 1903, Patterson summoned his fair-haired boy to the NCR headquarters in Dayton, Ohio. At the meeting, Watson was presented an assignment he would later come to regret. Patterson hated competition. Like many of his contemporaries, he believed monopolies were best for American commerce. NCR salesmen were trained to use all means necessary, including lies and sabotage, to eliminate threat to their territory by other cash register salesmen. When a market of used cash registers, including second-hand NCR registers, began to cut in on sales of new NCR products, Patterson had had enough. He wanted the used cash register business stopped, and Watson was going to pull the brake.
He wanted Watson to run an operation that would surreptitiously go into towns and buy out the used cash register company in town and basically close it down, or set up a shop that would compete with the used cash register company and undercut them in prices and drive them out of business. Anything to basically get rid of the competition in used cash registers.
Watson was instructed to create a company financed by NCR but hidden from their records that would shut down the used cash register market in selected cities. The plan was simple, effective, and even for the standard of the time, clearly illegal. For Watson, finally enjoying success and surely caught in the glare of Patterson's brilliant persona, there was likely little choice but to accept his new assignment.
It's so hard to know what might have been going through the guy's mind at the time, but I guess evidence suggests that he may have had some inklings that, that this wasn't the greatest thing to be doing, but he was also ambitious, and he was loyal to John Patterson, and he was the kind of person who felt that if he was asked to do something for the company, he would do it.
Despite any hesitations or misgivings, Watson executed Patterson's plan to perfection, helping to knock out and eliminate the used cash register business across the Northeast, and in the process, transforming himself from fair-haired boy to Patterson's superstar. In 1907, Watson was called back to Dayton, where he began to immerse himself in the John Patterson School of Management.
To Patterson, Watson was a protege. I mean, he saw something in Watson, and he brought him up as a young man. He was only in his 30s, as he rose through the ranks at NCR and became one of the top executives. And Patterson gave him a car to use and let him live in a house that he owned, and was a huge supporter of Watson, and Watson looked up to him as a father figure.
And he often says that everything he ever learned about business he learned from Patterson.
He impressed upon Watson through his own actions the need to be purposeful and methodical in what you do. That was very important. Also to realize that all parts of a company have to work with each other in order to get the job done.
Patterson elevated Watson to second in command and put him in charge of NCR's American selling force, by then an army of over 1,000 salesmen nationwide. Watson began to leave his mark on NCR, rousing the men at the company's 100-point club rallies and becoming a regular golfer at the firm's country club. He even introduced a new slogan, which he ordered be hung around the factory and offices. Now, successful and wealthy, Watson's star also began to rise in Dayton's social circle, where he met Jeanette Kittredge, the daughter of another Dayton industrialist. The couple began dating and soon made plans to marry. Watson finally believed he had exorcised the bitter failures of his past. But fate and the United States government were about to deliver the next lesson in the education of Thomas Watson. On February 22, 1912, a federal grand jury indicted John Patterson and 29 other NCR executives for violating federal antitrust laws stemming from the bogus cash register business. Watson's name was near the top of the list. The indictment included criminal charges, which carried a prison sentence of up to 3 years if convicted. The trial was held in November of 1912 at the height of the trust-busting era. In court, NCR was portrayed as an example of big business run amok. In the end, all defendants, including Patterson and Watson, were found guilty of violating the Sherman antitrust laws, fined $5,000, and sentenced to a year in prison. Thomas Watson was now a convicted criminal. Publicly, Watson refused to admit any guilt, standing firm to the principle that he was only doing what his superiors told him to do. Privately, he admitted it was a devastating blow and a permanent stain on his character. People underestimate how badly that trial hurt him, a friend later wrote. He was portrayed the villain. I don't think he ever recovered from it. The verdicts were appealed by NCR, but before a new trial could begin, fate once again stepped in.
In 1913, after NCR has already been convicted, this stupendous flood hits Dayton, Ohio. And it just so happened that Watson at the time was in New York. He was not in Dayton. And Patterson in Dayton organized the company and its executives and to try to do everything they could for the town. They did things like they had their carpenters start building wooden boats to go and rescue people. So Watson's in New York, and he realizes that Dayton has been isolated and can't get supplies in. So he goes about organizing a relief effort, and he starts to get donations from companies, medical supplies, food, anything that they might need back there in Dayton. And he essentially charters trains to get there. And this whole effort, the acts of NCR in Dayton, the relief effort of the Watson organized out of New York, starts getting headlines in newspapers as the nation wakes up to what has happened in Dayton, and it makes NCR frankly look like heroes at a time when they had just been convicted for antitrust violations, and it was a tremendous public relations victory for the company and for those people individually.
The Dayton flood relief efforts by Patterson, Watson, and NCR began to turn public opinion their way. Pleas for leniency and pardons poured into Woodrow Wilson at the White House. Watson began to believe that life at NCR would soon return to normal. Patterson's idea of normal, however, was quite different from Watson's.
After the conviction on antitrust charges, it seems that Patterson, in his mind, wanted to rid himself of the executives that were around him at that time and start again, in a sense.
Well, one of the things that was rather annoying about Patterson is that if he saw that an executive was going to usurp his authority or compromise Patterson's prime position in the firm, he got rid of them. And he got rid of them fast. I mean, it wasn't like today where you got to give an employee a certain notice and so on. you were out the door that day, escorted out, your desk got burnt in the parking lot, what have you. And this happened quite frequently. It's quite possible that at some point Patterson saw Watson as too popular in the firm, too successful in the firm, and that it held out the potential of compromising the old man's ability to run the shop the way he wanted.
Whether Watson was fired or quit remains unclear. Nevertheless, late in 1913, Watson walked out of the NCR headquarters in Dayton for the last time, leaving a changed and determined man.
Watson never directly talks about what happened at NCR in his later life, but it becomes pretty clear that erasing this stigma, erasing this failure from his life becomes something that drives him for the rest of his life.
On his way out of NCR, Watson turned to a friend and told him, "I've helped to build all but one of these buildings. Now I'm going to build a bigger business than John Patterson ever dreamed." In the fall of 1914, Thomas Watson boarded a train in New York City and headed upstate. He was 40 years old, married, and the father of a young son, Thomas Jr. He was also still carrying the weight of a criminal antitrust conviction with him. But he had found a job and was traveling to inspect his new company's manufacturing facilities in Endicott, New York, just an hour's train ride from his childhood home in Painted Post. Watson had accepted a position with CTR, the Computing Tabulating Recording Company, a collection of firms that by 1914 had begun to resemble the equivalent to early 20th century industrial gumbo. CTR had been cooked up by Wall Street financier Charles Ranlett Flint, who had become known as the father of trusts, for successfully creating large corporations in industries as varied as sealing wax to chewing gum. In 1911, he finalized the merger of 3 different companies that would lay the foundation for what in time would become IBM. The Computing Scale Company opened in 1881 and manufactured everything from butcher scales to bacon slicers and coffee grinders. Their corporate headquarters and main factory, ironically, operated around the corner from the NCR plant in Dayton, Ohio. By 1911, with their company floundering and burdened with nearly $1 million of debt, the board of directors turned to Flint for help. A shortage of cash had also forced Herman Hollerith and his tabulating machine company to the merger table. Born in Buffalo in 1860, Hollerith had showed little interest in school as a boy, but by the time he graduated from Columbia University in 1880, he had proved to be a math and mechanical ingenue. A professor urged him to consider joining the United States Census Bureau. At the moment, the Bureau needed any help they could get. When the population of the country began to swell from mass immigration, the Census Bureau faced increasing problems in compiling the data from the 1880 census.
There were just a lot of clerical errors that were made, and people knew that there were a lot of clerical errors, and there was pressure on the Census Bureau people to obtain more data and to analyze it more effectively.
Aware of his engineering background, John Billings, a census statistician, urged Hollerith to look for a way to facilitate data collection more efficiently. Billings suggested using a system similar to the century-old Jacquard loom, which controlled the patterns sewn in fabric using holes punched in paper cards. A similar system was also utilized by the telegraph office and in player pianos.
So he began to think about these as possibilities. Long story short, by 1888, 1889, he has developed a prototype of a device that could produce punch cards, so information from a census taker could be punched onto these cards, and then with those cards you could then sort them by question, by region, by person, by age, by whatever method you wanted. So they decided to try it for the 1890 census. Now remember, the 1880 census took almost a decade to complete the work. They rolled out this equipment, they used it for the 1890 census, and they did all the analysis, everything, in 18 months. Completed, finished, turned in the report to the Congress. It was a fantastic success story. There's no other way to describe it other than it was brilliant, it worked.
In that single instant, Herman Hollerith created the foundation for the information technology industry that continues to transform the planet.
I would never say that Hollerith was the father of the computer, but I would say the following, that the punch card equipment that he developed created the information processing industry.
Hollerith immediately grabbed the patents and created the tabulating machine company with a factory in Washington, D.C. Over the next 2 decades, business boomed, changing the way data was acquired and processed by the government, railroad, retail, and business communities. By 1910, however, the incredible demand for his machines, coupled with the high cost of production, created an immediate need for capital. It is not clear if Flint or Hollerith initiated merger talks. Nevertheless, by 1911, the second part of Flint's puzzle was in place, with one very important piece to go. Capital was not an issue for the International Time Recording Company in 1911. It was the most profitable of the 3 companies Flint was to bring together. ITR had a state-of-the-art manufacturing plant in Endicott thanks to 2 brothers named Bundy. Willard Bundy was a jeweler with exceptional mechanical skills who in 1888 invented the first electronic time clock. His timing was perfect. Mass production was changing the way American industry operated. Employers needed a better way to track the comings and goings and calculate pay for the thousands of workers in their plants. Willard's brother Harlow was a lawyer who lived in Oneonta and had contacts on Wall Street. Harlow helped to acquire the capital to finance his brother's invention, and in 1889, the Bundy brothers forever changed the course of the Southern Tier by opening Bundy Manufacturing on Water Street in Binghamton. By 1906, the company was making nearly 20,000 time clocks a year and needed to expand. They decided to build what would become the initial foundation of IBM's future empire on North Street in Endicott. By 1908, with Flint's help, the Bundy's company had merged with several other time clock makers and became the International Time Recording Company. The Dayton Scale Company and Hollerith's Tabulating Company needed capital. ITR was making money and had a solid manufacturing division in Endicott. Flint decided to bring them all together and create one corporation focused on information recording machines for business. So in June of 1911, the Computing Tabulating Recording Company, CTR, was born. By 1914, however, Flint's creation was in serious trouble.
CTR in 1914 was a mess, and it was going nowhere. And none of these people know each other. They were all in different businesses. They had different profit margins. They had different scales of revenue that they made. Nobody was related to each other. The factories and their headquarters were in different communities.
And it gets to a point in 1914 where he's desperate. He needs somebody to save this entity. And then he finds this convicted criminal to maybe do it.
Flint first had to convince a hesitant CTR board to give Watson the job. "Who's going to run the company while he's in prison?" a board member asked. Flint insisted and prevailed, But Watson was given the lesser title of general manager instead of CEO until his legal troubles played out. On December 7, 1914, Watson called all the salesmen and managers of the separate CTR divisions together for the first time at a hotel in New York City.
Watson is standing up in front of these guys, this dispirited group of guys, and saying, you know what, we all have to get together and pull in the same direction because we're going to create a great institution that's going to last for hundreds of years. Now, you know, imagine these guys in this meeting and they're going, who is this guy? You know, he's just come on board. He's telling this like little ragtag company that we're going to create a great institution. But he never wavered from that belief and from that, that message that he gave to employees.
In just one meeting, Watson had already begun to reassure a detached and beleaguered workforce. I knew it was critical that I grab hold of the company and start setting it upright without delay, he later wrote.
He knew that if he did that and was optimistic about the opportunities, no matter what the problems were, they would be overcome by this very well-run, well-staffed company. And in fact, that's exactly what happened.
Just a few weeks later, Watson traveled to Endicott and presented what he called his man proposition.
We are just men standing together, shoulder to shoulder, all working for one common good. We have one interest, and the good of each of us as individuals affects the greater good of the company.
Watson then decided to walk down from the Time Recorder factories on North Street and introduce himself to the man who he would later come to love and admire more than any other.
In 1914, when Watson comes to see his little factory of his little company, I mean, Watson is nothing. He's a little pipsqueak of a businessman, really. And he comes to Endicott, where one of the world's greatest shoe manufacturers is based, Endicott Johnson Shoes, run by George F. Johnson, who's gotten a lot of, international press for the way he runs this company. And Watson looks at what Johnson's built and he's very impressed. And he also starts to learn from the way Johnson runs his company. And he starts taking a lot, up to this point, the big influence on his management style has been John Patterson at NCR. And Johnson is a very, very different kind of manager. And it ends up having a big impact on Watson.
Watson confessed to Johnson that the CTR board wanted him to pull the factories out of Endicott and move them closer to CTR's headquarters in New York. But Johnson convinced Watson to stay and build in the area. It was George F. Johnson who first showed me what spirit this valley was made of, Watson would later admit. He convinced me to build on our concern here, and that is just what we did. But as Watson boarded the train for his return to New York, his only concerns were to get CTR on track and to rid himself of his legal troubles. The second matter was about to come to a dramatic conclusion. On March 13, 1915, the verdict against NCR for antitrust violations was set aside and a new trial was granted. But the Wilson administration decided to offer the defendants a deal. They would close the case if all involved signed a consent decree admitting to certain wrongdoing surrounding the used cash register business.
That consent decree said that if NCR should ever again, even remotely, do whatever it is the government accused them of, that the government had the right to retry the original case.
In the end, every defendant signed the agreement except one, Thomas Watson.
That whole little part is a bit of a mystery. Watson did not sign, and somehow he got away with not signing. It may have had something to do with the whole rescue effort in Dayton, that the government decided just not to press that. But in the end, Watson never admitted guilt for anything that happened at NCR.
Watson would never speak of the antitrust charges again, not to his workers or his family. 2 days after the ruling, the CTR board promoted Watson to president of the company. The darkest chapter of his life was behind him. He now had full authority to mold CTR into his vision. In 1918, Watson decided to bring together all the separate divisions of CTR, holding a massive convention for the sales and manufacturing forces at the ITR plant in Endicott. Watson never felt more alive or in control of his company than when he was with the men and women who worked in the field or on the bench. Watson had been in charge of CTR for over 4 years, and he was still tinkering with its operations. Tapping into his experience with NCR's national sales force, Watson devised a system for collecting information from the CTR salesmen in the field that would help drive the focus of the company's product research division.
Let me share with you how micromanaged this whole thing really was. I'll just give you one simple little example. One of the things that Watson insisted upon of his salesmen is that they call on their customers on a regular basis. These calls would be logged onto punch cards, and these cards were mailed to New York, where they were analyzed to see how many calls were being made, what the results were of the calls, where were more calls being made or not around the country, and reports were produced for Watson. That information not only told Watson what was going on at the branch office, but also provided information that he could feed back to the engineers, for example, here in Endicott, who were being asked to develop new products and to help guide them in their work.
By the early 1920s, Watson's innovations had begun to show solid gains in the sales of time clocks and punch card machines. But CTR was still making dozens of different products, not all of them related. Watson wanted to create a company unlike any other, one he could build into a world leader in business technologies.
So his challenge was to figure out how to do this. Now, he took his time to figure it out. He had to figure out which parts of the business were successful and had a future and which did not. And in time, he came to realize that there was one part of the business that more than any other represented the greatest opportunity for IBM, and that is the holograph business, the punch card business.
He arrived at this through a series of smart business decisions. The computing scales business was never doing all that well. It struggled, and so starting in the 1920s, Watson was looking for a way to sell it. He just wanted out of that business. The time recording business, the punch card, the clocks and all of that, was a pretty good business for IBM, and it remained so for quite a long time. And yet when Watson looked at the tabulating machines business, I think he saw two things that he really liked. One was that, remember, he learned back at NCR how valuable it was to be a super dominant player, if not a monopoly. And the tabulating machine business didn't really, it had some little pieces of competition here, but it really didn't have competition. And IBM, CTR, whatever at the time, owned most of the intellectual property for it, so he could shut others out. The other part that was appealing to Watson was that as he was this sort of big thinker, he was this optimist, he was this person who wanted to think about what things were like 20 years from now or 100 years from now. And with the tabulating machines and information technology, he could do that.
Watson then made another critical decision. He realized the name CTR no longer fit into his world vision for the company. He looked at the names of titans like General Electric and American Telephone and Telegraph, and wanted a brand that carried the weight of a giant. So, on February 9, 1924, Watson registered a name change with the New York State Stock Exchange, and CTR officially became International business machines. IBM. By the end of the 1920s, it was obvious to Watson that Johnson's advice to stay and build in Endicott was paying off. IBM had little problem finding loyal and ready workers to fill the growing need. The sons and daughters of the first-generation Americans that had flocked to the region to make shoes were now ready to fulfill their parents' dreams, a dream now made possible by E.J.'s growing industrial neighbor in Endicott.
My father worked at E.J.'s, enjoyed the company, appreciated what they did and so forth. But he could really see, the hardships that, to work for E.J.'s, the physical aspects of the work. And knowing IBMers and seeing the IBM, the grounds and so forth, that really was a better life in terms of, professionally and also for your lifestyle. So that's what he really talked about. He says, as much as he appreciated E.J.'s, he felt that, the goal should be something beyond that.
The best way I can put it is the way it was put to me by a second-generation Slovak American who was in one of the first graduate courses I taught here. He brought in the hospital bill from his birth to show me why his parents so much enjoyed working for E.J. And there's the bill from the hospital, stamped, paid in full by E.J. Then he said to me, his parents said to him, we were immigrants. English wasn't our language. E.J. was good enough for us. But, Richard, you're American. It's not good enough for you.
Endicott was the heart and soul of IBM. Even though headquarters were in New York, the heart and soul of it was Endicott.
And it was for several reasons. One is, let's not forget that he was a local. He was raised in central New York. They were an extension of his family. This is his world. He understood them, and he understood the workforce here. They came from the same roots he did. They grew up on farms and lived in towns, small towns. Like, he understood them, they understood him. So over many, many years, other missions, to use a good old IBM term, were transferred or given to Endicott. And one of those was the manufacture of punch card equipment. So this became ground zero, plant number one, the epicenter in the world for the development of punch card equipment for a very long period of time.
In 1931, Watson laid out a vision for future expansion of the Endicott plants. They included a state-of-the-art research laboratory and an IBM training and sales school. Few American companies at the time invested as much time and resources into the education and development of its workers and products as IBM under Thomas Watson Sr. It would be one of his greatest contributions to the growth not only of IBM, but to the future development of information technology.
Watson was enamored of engineering and research. He got involved in a number of remarkable high technology projects, but these were things that led to great developments in the future.
He would assign 2 or 3 development projects that address the same problem to 2 or 3 different groups, 2 or 3 different inventors. And then he'd let a foot race occur and see which one came up with the best product. It allowed the company to create competition, if you will, in the development of innovative products. The best one won, meaning that it was the one most attractive to the marketplace at the time that they needed a new product. But it also meant that there were new technologies being developed, new methods on those that weren't chosen at a particular moment, which then later on could be applied either to the winning product or to a whole new product line itself. And careers were tied to this thing. If your product got chosen, you were the product manager for that, and you went on to success and everything else, and the other individual might have his career plateau for a while until his or her product got chosen and flowered. And so there were, and the whole divisions then later on were created around this whole notion.
This school and the laboratory go hand in hand. They're both educational institutions. They represent the heart of our business, the foundation. Everything good that goes to that factory and that goes out into the field to our customers is a result of the efforts of the people in the laboratory and in the educational work.
The school was really a cultural institution. The school was a way to, when IBM hired people, to bring them in and run them through this filter that indoctrinated them into the culture and ejected the people who weren't going to belong in the culture. There are very few things like it in American history, and that was a very important facet of the whole IBM experience.
In 1925, an IBM sales manager named Harry Evans showed Watson a book of songs he had written. Evans enjoyed creating his own compositions based on popular tunes of the day. Each song celebrated or poked a little fun at Watson or an IBM manager or engineer. Watson loved it and had the songbook printed and distributed across the company. Soon the IBM songs were being sung at meetings and sales conventions throughout IBM.
Happy days are here again, 8,000 hearts in IBM, all loyalty, J. Watson men, love our noble president.
An original composition, Ever Onward, written in 1931 by IBMer Frederick Tape, became the official company rally song.
Ever onward, that's the spirit that has brought us fame. We're big, but bigger we will be. We can tell for all to see that to serve humanity has been our aim. Our products now are known in every zone. Our reputation sparkles like a gem. We fought our way through and new fields we're sure to conquer to for the ever onward IBM.
The songs, though, are an interesting piece of cultural glue at IBM, in part because it's so odd. And yes, it was a different time, and people were willing to do those kinds of things, maybe that they, in ways they wouldn't now. But there were a lot of facets of IBM that were different and odd to the outside world. One of them was getting up and singing songs. One of them was the no alcohol, no drinking policy. And what all of these things did was it made you part of a club. If you bought into all of that, you were an initiated member of the IBM club. You felt like you were part of that clan. Everybody, shared these same odd little traits. And what it also did was that if somebody joined IBM and they didn't like that stuff, then they didn't fit in, it kind of ejected them. Which again, furthered that culture, furthered that sense of, we're all, a family, a unit of some kind.
Ever onward, ever onward. Yeah.
And he likes to sing.
Once a week, our class sang songs out of the IBM songbook. Ever onward, that's the spirit that has taught us fame. We're good, but better we can be. Well, anyway.
When Watson first arrived at CTR in 1914, he had brought with him his Think slogan. Now, nearly 20 years later, Think had become the transcendent symbol for IBM. Think signs decorated walls in nearly every office and factory floor in the company. When the IBM school was completed, a 10-foot Think sign greeted every student who walked through the door. Think soon entered the vernacular of American popular culture. It wasn't long before American cartoonists began poking a little fun at Watson's odd little motto. Watson, too, helped drive the nation's curiosity and interest in IBM. In 1935, when the government released the names of the highest-paid Americans, Watson's name was at the top of the list. Everyone wanted to know more about the man who made more money than Clark Gable.
Watson Sr. was perhaps the first celebrity CEO of the 20th century. And he's one of the first ones who's trying to, if you will, control the message. And I don't mean that in a cynical way. He is promoting the company, and he's always talking in positive terms about data processing and about the economy growing. And whenever the economy was in trouble, he tended to be the one that people would get a quote out of that said, well, things are going to get better. And you need that in tough times.
By the mid-1930s, however, many had begun to believe that Watson's optimism and ego were beginning to cloud his judgment. Even as the Great Depression wore on and demand for IBM punch card equipment dropped dramatically, Watson continued to invest and build. When all industries, including George F. Johnson's shoe plants, were forced to cut workers' hours, Watson flatly refused to scale back production.
You know, this is his family, right? You know, that's the way he looks at this company. So he'll be damned if he's going to get rid of workers he worked so hard to build, bring in and train, or close down factories he worked so hard to create.
Watson continued to expand the factories along North Street, then purchased 400 acres of land on the hills east of Endicott and built the IBM Country Club. Watson continued to raise pay and add benefits for his IBM family members, all helping to raise his status in the Southern Tier to a level equal to his friend and mentor, George F. Johnson.
Friends in IBM, and even his board of directors, really questioned his sanity, saying, you ought to be laying off people, you ought to be cutting back expenses, you shouldn't be doing this.
One of the things he did was to continue manufacturing punch card equipment all during the Depression. At a slower rate, but nevertheless he manufactured and he put it away, expecting that there would be use for it when the economy turned around.
The board starts to meet and think, you know, we might need to throw this guy out. He's going to ruin the company. You know, every other company that's smart is cutting back and, you know, trying to survive this economic times, and Watson refuses. And this is just draining IBM's business. And the company's on the brink of ruin.
By 1935, with warehouses across the Southern Tier jammed full of punch card equipment IBM couldn't lease, it looked like Watson had overplayed his hand and his luck had run out. Then, a landmark legislation changed everything.
Today, a hope of many years standing is in large part fulfilled.
Roosevelt signs this act into law and essentially overnight creates the biggest information problem in history at that point. Suddenly the federal government has to keep track of millions and millions of workers' paychecks and the figures for them and what's coming in and then what has to get going out, cut the checks. You know, it's just a gigantic tabulating and computing problem. There's only one place to turn. IBM, Watson's going, I got warehouses full of this stuff.
And it wasn't just government bureaus that were obtaining IBM equipment, but a lot of businesses found they also had to rent IBM equipment in order to provide the Social Security system with the information it needed.
It not only saves IBM, but more than that, it actually vaults IBM into the top stratosphere of American companies and ends up making IBM one of the great growth stories of the Great Depression.
Watson and his company would never look back. After the passage of the Social Security Act, IBM revenue began a rate of growth over the next 50 years that remains unsurpassed in American business history. As the demand for punch card equipment grew, so too did Watson's empire in Endicott. By 1939, employment at the Endicott factories had soared to nearly 7,000. That year also marked an important anniversary for Watson and IBM.
1939 fell on the 25th anniversary of Watson joining IBM. And so he was looking for a big place to, sort of celebrate and put IBM's stamp on the world. And, there happened to be a World's Fair available.
The World's Fair was vintage Watson promoting his company as being bigger than real life.
The great day begins early. President Watson and his family, up at the crack of dawn, arrive at the World's Fair grounds at 9 o'clock. Before us we see the famous ceremonial guard of Haskell Indians, which forms an escort of honor for them from without the gates. Approaching Perilon Hall, in which the guests of honor are to be received, the escort draws up in line and tips lances in salute to President Watson.
Watson was a consummate salesman. He saw as one of his jobs was to go sell IBM to the world.
Sights of the fair.
The whole purpose of the World's Fair was to talk about the future. So GE and all these other companies would put together these pavilions where they would fantasize about what the world would look like in the 1960s and beyond. And Watson wanted in on that.
Here we are inside the hall, our attention drawn at once to the great glass globe that occupies the center of the gallery. It contains one of IBM's miracle working machines, the last word in modern electrical accounting equipment.
It's one of the most highly attended pavilions at the World's Fair, and it gets a lot of publicity. And if you didn't know about IBM as an individual citizen before, you did afterwards.
Carry this great story to all corners of the earth as a message from the New York World's Fair, as an invitation for them to all come here and participate in this and make their contribution toward this cause of peace, which means more to us than anything else in the world. I thank you very much.
World peace through world trade had become a personal passion for Watson. He truly believed that the participation by nations in global commerce could help prevent war.
But if we all continue to increase and prepare better for war, why someday a war will be started somewhere, and before it's over with, we'll all be in it. Now, it's a serious thing because we know that no one won the last war. We all lost as a result of it. We'll all lose as a result of another war.
Watson did believe that, he increasingly believed that he could make a difference and that he was, perhaps even a man of history. He was building this great company, this great organization, and he had some ideas about world peace through world trade, and he was getting a platform and an audience, and he started to have meetings with world leaders to promote this. He had tea with Hitler.
In 1937, Watson had accepted a medal from the German government for his work with the International Chamber of Commerce. Like it had 35 years earlier, with Patterson and the bogus cash register business, blind ambition once again compromised Watson's judgment.
By the mid-1930s, the persecution of the Jews and things like that were coming to light, and Watson was certainly not buying into it, but he was turning, maybe a blind eye to what was going on and figuring he could fix it through this idea of world peace through world trade, which he could not. He accepted the medal, I think, in trying to still promote that idea of friendship and trade and peace and all this. And in retrospect, it was not a good idea, and he got lambasted for it at the time, and it cost him.
On June 6, 1940, with half of Europe now under German occupation and mounting pressure from both in and outside of IBM, Watson boxed up the medal and sent it back to Germany. In view of the present policies of your government, which are contrary to the causes for which I have been working, I am returning it forthwith.
Once Watson realized what was happening and what Hitler really was and what Germany really was at that time, he sent the medal back and he just turned on a dime. Once the U.S. entered the war, he threw IBM's resources completely behind the effort, and the products that IBM made a difference.
One of the biggest parades ever to decorate the streets of Endicott, New York, swings along in timely rhythm to the tune and theme of national defense. This star-spangled pageant of patriotism has taken the town by storm. Everybody's all out for IBM Day, a great day for the Triple Cities. The International Business Machine Corporation's new $1 million plant is ready to be opened.
When World War II came along, Watson Sr. personally recognized that there would be a huge demand for two things. Data processing equipment, because you could not fight a modern war without data processing.
Here's the new plant, the latest recruit to join the ranks of industry in America's drive to reinforce the arsenal of democracy. It will manufacture precision parts for guns and munitions.
And secondly, the requirement for the capabilities of being able to make precision equipment would rise. This would be a war with technology. And remember, at the time, the single largest facility for the manufacture of anything in IBM was here in Endicott. So a lot of it came out of here.
During World War II, the United States military created the Army-Navy E Award, which was presented to a company for excellence in production. Of the over 107,000 companies doing war work, only 4% of them would receive the E Award. The IBM plant in Endicott would receive the award 3 times during World War II.
World War II changed a lot of things for IBM. As men went off to war, women took their place in factories in many, many industries. The same thing happened at IBM. Women also went into office roles. For the first time, you had women managers, including a vice president of HR. So women began to seep into corners of IBM where they had never been before.
By the end of the war, IBM had nearly doubled in size. Watson also made good on a pre-war promise and welcomed over 1,600 IBM veterans back to their posts in 1945.
These individuals came back from war. They came back different men and women. They had learned a lot about electronics. They had learned a lot about how you operate a large enterprise. They had seen the world. And they brought back this new knowledge about how organizations operate and a worldliness that hadn't been there before. Many went off to college under the GI Bill, some of them in this area. There was a whole new mood, a modernity that had been injected into the company by the end of the 1940s that was different than it had been before.
IBM had become so large that the company's 100% club convention had outgrown the Waldorf Astoria Hotel ballroom in New York City. Watson decided to move the event to Endicott, housing the salesmen in over 400 tents sprawled out along the hills above the country club. It became known as Tent City, where the successful 100%ers would attend a week of meetings and demonstrations held in a massive 200-foot-long main tent. It was Watson's favorite event of the year. It was his chance to get to know the men and women he felt true kinship with, the salesmen.
Watson was once asked what his hobby was. His answer was, "I collect salesmen." He was always a salesman. Regardless of what job he had, he was first and foremost a peddler. A professional peddler, but still a peddler. And one of the reasons he loved the 100% Club, where he would bring in the best of the salesmen, is that not only would it allow him to get direct feedback about what was going on in the field with customers, what their needs and desires were, but also about how the products were working, how the company was working. But he could also hang out with a bunch of guys that he liked. And by the way, in those days, it was a bunch of guys. And he'd bring them to his sweet spot, which happened to be Endicott. So it was really like family.
IBM in Endicott was now an institution. With over 8,000 workers, it was as important to the region's culture and economy as the Endicott Johnson Corporation. After visiting the Southern Tier in 1946, a New York Times reporter wrote, "It is hard to imagine a more perfect place to work and live than for IBM in the Southern Tier of New York."
Like many new and creative companies in the early part of the 20th century, IBM was really part of the American dream. As the company grew, because it had the right products at the right time, the right place, they thrived. They bought homes, their children then were sent to school. More importantly, they were also sent to college. It was expected that they would go to college, so they lived the American dream.
In 1952, IBM was hailed by Fortune magazine as the world leader in the business machine industry, largely because of the clear monopoly it possessed in the tabulating machine business. But the world was shifting. Remington Rand and the Burroughs Corporation were beginning to challenge IBM's position in the new electronic age. New technologies like adding machines and automatic computers were beginning to change the data processing landscape.
At a staffed computer center, basic resources data are being assembled on magnetic tapes. When fed into computers along with data on weapons, the amount and location of remaining resources can be determined.
IBM would stumble briefly, losing ground to RAND's UNIVAC computer early, but quickly regaining its dominance in 1952 with the release of the IBM 701, the company's first electronic data processing machine. But the new electronic world would not be ruled by Watson Sr. After World War II, his sons, Tom Jr. and Arthur, had joined the IBM family. By 1952, Tom Jr. was IBM's president and was running much of the daily operations.
It's an interesting period for him, the last 5 years of his life. He's still running the company. He knows it's changing. The ground is shifting beneath his feet. Some of the business was slipping out of his hands. Electronics is coming into the fore, and he's supportive of it. So he saw that going on. Increasingly becoming nostalgic about the firm. That's why he did a lot of these family dinners around the country, around the world actually. But increasingly he also saw that he had competent people around him who could take the lead on decisions. When he would have disagreements with his son, Tom, about what to do next, he began to defer to Tom and to congratulate him on decisions.
By the spring of 1956, at age 82, his famous drive and energy had begun to fade. On May 8th, he called Tom to his office and officially handed over the reins of IBM. A week later, Watson traveled to Endicott to hand out trophies at the country club's annual sports banquet. The next morning, he boarded a train and left Endicott for the last time. A month later, on June 19, 1956, Thomas Watson died at his home in New Canaan, Connecticut. The next day, the New York Times marked his passing, eulogizing him as the world's greatest salesman. Under his son Thomas, IBM would rise to a level of dominance unmatched in the history of enterprise. By the time he retired in 1970, IBM bestrode the business world like a colossus. No company wielded more power and garnered more fear and envy than Big Blue. The Southern Tier would ride the wave of IBM's incredible success. Throughout the decades, engineers, technicians, and inventors working locally played pivotal roles in the development of IBM technologies. Their contributions not only helped drive IBM's success, but advanced research and innovations in science and technology that would change the world forever. Today, nearly a century after he first arrived, IBM remains in Endicott, but much of the empire Watson built is gone, quickly slipping away during IBM's restructuring in the final decade of the 20th century. For many, the fading physical remnants of Watson's once vast kingdom continue to be a bitter reminder of a lost and shattered dream. But a deeper, more lasting impression of the Thomas Watson era is clearly visible throughout the valley.
My father immigrated to the United States in the early 50s and was hired by IBM Endicott as a process engineer, moved here in 1957 and worked for IBM for 27 years until his death. IBM was a big part of our life. It was, growing up, I was invited to do some plant tours from time to time. IBM had a country club, and so I was very active in their sports programs there. And it was a great place to be with other kids your age, and I had a great time with that. My oldest daughter got involved in Odyssey of the Mind 3 years ago. The next year, my wife and I decided that we'd take a hand at trying to coach a team, so we coached a team last year. We were fortunate to go to states, and this year now both my daughters are on our team here. We won both at regional, we both at our state competition, and now we're moving forward to the world competition that'll be held in just over 2 weeks from now.
When he was 7, like he said, he used to go down in my basement and we'd work on the computer together. And I think that was where some of the interest came from in the technology. Yeah. And today I can't even stay with him. He is unbelievable when it comes to these games.
Yeah, well, he introduced me to video games. I was surprised because I'm like, what are all these computers for? About 3 computers and even more monitors and desktops. And he's like, oh, it's for my work and video games. And I'm like, you play video games? And I didn't really understand it. And that, you're never too old to play video games. And I guess, your experience with IBM kind of led to that and being introduced with the beginning.
This is the legacy of IBM in this community. It's in the parents who are working here to rejuvenate their community. It's in the children who are succeeding in school and who no doubt in the years to come will look back and say, my daddy worked at IBM. Or my grandfather worked at IBM. Oh, have you seen my little collection that my grandfather gave me of my little 100% Club pins? Or my mother's charm bracelet with the 100% Club pins. My mother wears that now. You're going to see that. And what we can't predict is how that's going to play out, but it is going to play out because these are not stupid children. They come from a heritage of education and of a work ethic that not only is IBM's, but it's also what was here that drew IBM to Endicott in the first place. And you can't rub that out, whether you want to or not. It's there.
Production sponsorship for Watson, provided by Visions Federal Credit Union. Additional support provided by Coughlin and Gerhardt, LLP. Hinman Howard and Cattell, LLP. Marilyn Gaddis Rose. Patricia J. Foreman. Robert F. Lush. And by contributions to WSKG from viewers like you. Thank you. Special thanks to IBM Endicott for use of archival footage and photographs.